Welcome to American Architecture Now. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and our guest this evening is Cesar Pelli. A native of Argentina, Mr. Pelli came to this country for 9 months on an Institute of International Education scholarship. That was in 1952, and happily for us, has remained here ever since. For the next 25 years, he worked in Illinois and California, and then in 1977, he came east to assume the duties of the Dean of the Yale School of Architecture and to open his own architectural office. Mr. Pelli has always been concerned with a combination of commercial concerns and aesthetic ones, and has sought to place his practice at that point of intersection. A very warm welcome to you. After earning a Master of Science degree in architecture in 1954 at the University of Illinois, you spent the next 10 years working in the office of Eero Saarinen in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and in New Haven, Connecticut. Actually, Saarinen's independent professional life was a very short one. He opened an office separate from his distinguished father, Yale, in 1950 and then died in 1961. For 7 of those short 11 years, you were involved in a very close relationship. Perhaps you would begin by describing for us life in that office. Did you learn any formal kind of system from him? Was he an important influence on your work?
Yes, he was clearly a very important influence, probably the most important influence in my work. Not in any formal terms, but more in my understanding of architecture, if you wish, my love for architecture, and losing the fear that sometimes one has of making buildings. It was a wonderful place to be in, particularly because it was continuously changing. When I joined the firm, it was a little atelier still of about 25 persons. By the time he died, we had 120 persons in the firm, and it had become a very highly organized and very, very efficient machine. So that the office kept on changing continuously all the time that I was there. The other thing that was important, of course, was that this continuous search that Eero was engaged in, and that some of us were able to participate. And it was a search with no known or given end. It was an open-ended search. He was not selling a style or an attitude or even a personal philosophy, which allowed us, each one of us that was able to collaborate with him, to conduct our own private search at the same time for our own ideas, our own forms, our own way of doing architecture. In that way, it was an extraordinarily good place to have one apprenticeship.
You've compared the office more, this 1950s office, to a 1970s office. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, the office was really very much of a 1970s office towards the end. I think there was no office of that type at that time that was so efficiently run, which is what most offices have become today. He had an extraordinarily good sense for, and he actually had a tremendous sense of responsibility. This was at the basis of Eero's attitude towards architecture. And he felt that he was engaged to perform a very important service. And the delivery of that service was preeminent in his mind. And I think most of us that have worked with him, we have all acquired the same sense of responsibility and the same feeling that the primary responsibility is the delivery of a service, a very important, difficult service.
All of the buildings which he considered important were built or finished after he died, except for the General Motors project. In the case of the CBS headquarters building, from what I have been given to understand, he died within a week after the gray granite was selected. How does that work? Who was responsible for not only the completion, but in some instances in that building, the initiation of the project?
Kevin Roach. for the last 4 or 5 years of Ero's life, Kevin Roach had moved into a very special position within the firm, that he worked very closely with Ero in all projects. Kevin did not run any one project of his own like other project designers did, but he participated in all projects. Therefore, he was very deeply involved in the process of design with Ero from the beginning. And he clearly understood Ero's intentions completely and would carry through and finish a design by Ero as if Ero would have been alive.
Among your responsibilities there, you were the project director for both the TWA terminal at JFK International Airport and the Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Two highly acclaimed and highly controversial buildings as well. Can you tell us something about those commissions and the evolution of the design and your role in them?
Actually, in both of those projects, although I was project designer, I shared that position with 2 other designers in the firm. I got involved in both projects halfway through their development. In TWA, I got involved in the project after the basic partie had been established, but not the formal development or the formal vocabulary. And with the Vivian Beaumont Talent Theater, after the exterior had been designed, but before the house got developed, and I developed the interior of the house. The project, I did a few other projects, that I ran more on from the beginning to end. When I ran, I ran them for Ero. Ero was the architect. Were the two colleges for Yale University, Stiles and Morse colleges. With those, I was involved for about 3 years.
Let's come back to the theater for a moment. When you worked on that interior, was Joe Malziner involved with you at that point?
That's correct. I used to work with Hugh Hardy.
That was going to be the next question.
Yes, because Hugh at that time was working with Joe Malziner. And since then, we have remained friends.
It's obvious that Saarinen tried to enrich the vocabulary of architecture, but he did it in a way that he knew would often bring criticism. For example, the shape of an airline terminal that obviously had a bird-like form. What did you think of you and the people within that office think of the evolution of that kind of design?
The Ero's design process was as criticized within the office as he was outside the office. The criticism was rather free and open, which actually, looking back, I think that was extremely healthy. He had and actually contributed to clear certain things and to demystify Ero. Ero was always a man, a very good architect that we all respected, but he was always a man. He was never a god.
What does that mean?
He was no god or genius or guru. He was a man, a very good man. And I think that was extraordinarily healthy. And I think that's probably is one of the reasons why so many of the designers that worked with him, which were really very few.
So many of them have become so well known. There are more than 20 people in that office.
That is correct. There were about 20, through his life, there must have been about 20 designers that worked closely with him, were given positions of sufficient responsibility.
Can you tell us who some of them were, including yourself?
Sure. Kevin Roach, of course, Bob Venturi, Warren Plattner, Paul Cannon, Chuck Bassett. Who else? I'll be forgetting some very obvious ones, probably. And they will be calling me on the phone after they see this program.
We'll give you a chance to correct it and amend it.
There were Tony Lumsden.
Saarinen spoke often, and you've said this, of decoration, which he thought was necessary and inevitable. When you speak of the Stiles and Morse colleges at Yale that you were so profoundly involved in, how well do you think the ornamentation there has stood up?
He not always spoke of ornamentation. Ornamentation was one of what he always felt was that modern architecture in the international style version was lacking something that today we would call its semantic content or the ability to communicate. With the colleges, he was a graduate of Yale, of course, and a very dedicated Yale alumni. And for him, the responsibility was preeminent responsibility was to give Yale the best he could give, regardless of what this would do to his career as an architect. And indeed, he knew that he was in trying to do a building that would be sort of or have a Gothic character, or a building that would be reminiscent of buildings in Oxford or Cambridge, that he was courting criticism, as he indeed received. But he felt that this was the only way that he could responsibly fulfill his responsibility toward those undergraduates at Yale. We disagreed we had many arguments about how best to fulfill that responsibility, but that was very clear in his mind.
After the Saarinen experience, you practiced for some time in California, first with Daniel Mann Johnson and Mendenhall, and then with Gruen Associates. And in quite a remarkable fashion, you managed to become one of the few architects in the country to have made a major reputation on your own while being associated with a large corporate firm. While you were at Gruen Associates, a number of notable buildings were completed under your direction. One of those buildings, and I'm talking about the 1973 Commons and Courthouse Center in that center of architecture in the United States, Columbus, Indiana, is a building that you have described by saying that it subverts the normal decision-making process that architects usually make. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
It doesn't actually subvert the actual decision-making process, but the imagined or the accepted norm of what the decision-making process
What is
be.
The normal decision-making process?
The normal decision-making process is one that today we'll say that the primary preoccupations are formal preoccupations, where the architect is fully in control and primarily responsible. In that project, my primary responsibilities, as you can see, that's something that I did acquire from Eero, were towards the function that that building should play. And by function, I am not talking about function in functionalist terms, but the purpose of that building, the intention of that building, the basic intention of that building, what our client and patron, Erwin Miller, who together with his wife and sister, Mrs. Tangeman, donated the money for the project and donated then the project to the city of Columbus. Their intention was to create, to do with architecture, to try to provoke a change in the way that the city would function, to bring people back to downtown, to bring back life into downtown of downtown Columbus. By the time we were engaged, many of the stores were being boarded up and people were fleeing to the suburbs. So that was the primary intention, how to develop with architecture a social condition that would affect a change. And this was what was preeminent in our minds. The importance of creating this is really very basic. In a town where the primary life action takes place in the suburbs, the town fragments itself into ethnic and economic enclaves, which may be good, I doubt it very much, for those most affluent, but clearly it diminishes the quality of life for those less affluent. They shop in a shopping center for the poor, and they have a school for the poor, and that's all the extent of their life. Downtowns are traditionally the area where all of these groups, and also age groups which cut, let's say, if one can say that the cuts are vertical cuts that separate economic and ethnic groups, there are also horizontal cuts that separate age groups, teenagers from the young and active and the old, and sometimes even the children. And all of these groups become fragmented and our lives become much poorer. Downtown, a fully working downtown, should be able to attract and provide a rich life for all of these groups, not separately, but together. This was the primary intention. Now, this is very difficult to do with architecture, because architecture is not a social mechanism per se. Architecture or a building like that is really like building an instrument. The instrument still has to be played. No instrument, no violin, no piano produces music by itself, even if it's a Stradivarius. You still need a good violinist. Now, in this project, the challenge was that we were building this attraction, this magnet, this place that was going to promote life for a town of 30,000 people. That is, none of the devices that one can use in a large city where you create an excitement, that means you bring people out of their home for something unusual, would work there, because one gets very tired of unusual things. One gets very tired of things that are exciting. What you need is something that will be, that will give you life and that will recharge you in a day-to-day basis.
Well, how did you choose to solve that in this small town, in terms of the scale, in terms of a magnet for continuing interest, and both outside and inside that center?
Therefore, the important thing was to create an element that would allow for, that would be attractive to people to be, to enjoy the space alone, in small groups, in larger groups, or in very large groups up to about 1,500 people. We proposed not only a building, but we proposed a way of running it. And we thought that if the space was well run, that they could have one event a year. Maybe, if they were very good, that they would have a few extra events for special festivities, 15, 16 events a year. They have been having, for the last 4 or 5 years, 270, 280, 290 events every year. These events are self-started. They are not promoted by the center. Most of these are self-started by groups that pre-existed, but primarily by ad hoc groups. Everything that happens in Columbus now that has a public nature takes place at the Commons. And people go there to read the paper, to play chess, to meet friends, to do business, and to do a great number of activities. The activities I just covered the whole spectrum of things that you know, and many that I didn't imagine existed.
Did you ever expect to unleash what you had with that design?
We hoped that this would work very well, but we did not expect it to work as well. Now, the principle that we used was a very simple one, was an accumulation of small moves. And therefore, whenever there was something else that we could add that would increase the intensity or the quality of the life in that space, we did it even if we had to sacrifice things, aesthetical, some aesthetical parts of the building. For example, the building was under construction when they told us that they had finally convinced a movie company to put 2 movie houses in the center, which we had given up months before. This meant an intrusion in an already designed building that ruined considerably, distorted one of our elevations. But when I was told that they could bring these 2 movies, I didn't doubt for a second. I said, wonderful, we'll make room for them. And
so your primary concern was not an aesthetic one, but whether the building would work or not?
We were concerned with aesthetics, and I think we have a very beautiful building. A building that it's part of town. It has the scale of the town, but it looks radically different. That means it's not one of the other buildings. It's a very special building. It's a unique building. This is the building of everybody in town.
Particularly in that part of town.
In that part of town. And the building, there, has that quality. That is what I said. The process is one that, in the terms, for example, of all of the people that you have had in this program, because I have had discussions about this building with many of them, the process is subverted. It's not the process that we expect. I think aesthetically the building is highly resolved, but the aesthetical resolutions follow the primary concerns, the primary intentions, which in that particular building are extreme. See, because we were creating a new type. One of the problems I have with that building is that I cannot call it anything. It's not a something, because there is no other space like this anywhere. It is a unique thing. Now, it should be a prototype for other buildings because it works. there are many of the interventions that have taken place in our urban centers, particularly decaying urban centers, very few have succeeded. The record of intervention in decaying urban centers by planners and urban designers has been rather dismal. This is a fantastic success, and it should really be a prototype, but it has no generic name at this moment. So far, it's just the commons of Columbus.
Do you imagine it being replicated or adapted elsewhere?
It could not be replicated identically because this building has been extremely careful, tailored for Columbus. But the principles could be used, and I think the basic intentions, the basic ideas are applicable to a number of other cities.
When you talked about Saarinen, you said that he was never a local architect, that he didn't feel ties to a specific locale or to a landscape or to a light that many other architects talk about. He was born in Finland, and you say he had the characteristics of immigrants who come to this country young, and that is the permeability to the American experience that makes them, in some cases, more American than the Americans. Obviously, your story of Columbus, Indiana brings that very much to mind. Would that be an accurate description of your assimilation as well?
Yes, yes. It's different because the Eero had still, his Finnish roots were more important architecturally than my Argentinian roots because his father was a very good architect with a rather successful practice in Finland before Yale Saarinen, before Yale moved to America, and part of a circle of artists and architects in Finland that Eero knew well before coming to America. So his Finnish, and the fact that there were other important Finnish architects like Alvar Aalto, of course, was a very important consideration for Eero. So, you know, all cases are different, but within the terms of your words, I think it is accurate, yes.
I'm really thinking of your own identification.
In that case, yes, sometimes I feel that I'm more American than Americans are, yes.
You practiced for years on the West Coast and then burst onto the East Coast architectural scene in a rather spectacular way. First by becoming Dean of the Yale School of Architecture, and second by winning the commission to design the expansion of the Museum of Modern Art. Before we discuss the specifics of those projects, can you say a word about the difference between East Coast architectural practice and the West Coast?
Well, there are really many differences within the same country, of course. So the differences are within that context of a basic similarity. The differences are in the cultural environment. Particularly in the years that I was practicing in the West Coast, I must say, is changing rapidly in the last 5 years or so. One worked in an architecturally cultural vacuum, which I must say, for me, it was very good. It was very, very healthy. It's also what I wanted. When I left the office of Eero Saarinen and I was put in charge of the design department at the MJM or DEMGIM, for about 2 years, I didn't look at an architectural magazine or read an architectural book.
Was that a relief?
No, I needed to do that. It was a natural reaction. I needed to be dealing with the act of making buildings directly. So this cultural vacuum, in architecture, in a way, was an extension of the same consideration, so that I really felt that I had to be free to make my own mistakes, which I did. In the East Coast, the cultural density is much higher. It's impossible to proceed freely to make your own mistakes. Your mistakes are being pointed to you way ahead of time, and also
before they've even occurred in some instances.
That is correct. So therefore, it's quite different. You know, for different personalities, the effect is it's much different now. It was very good for me, as I said, after having been with somebody like Saarinen for 10 years, And, but eventually, there is a limit in what you can do working only with yourself. And therefore, at that point, you need, if one wants to keep on sharpening one's own perceptions and processes, the level of critical exchange has to be higher. The intensity is higher here. Therefore, the pressures force you to hone your own attitudes, thoughts, ideas, and sensitivities to a much, much sharper edge. At that time, I was just more concerned with making some sort of a blade. And so the change for me at this moment in my career has been just very, very good. The perfect timing. It's I have been very fortunate, very lucky.
You are now the Dean of the Architecture School at Yale and followed another West Coast architect, Charles Moore, in that position. Has the East met the West in any significant way at Yale?
No, see, I'm not a West Coast architect. I was an architect practicing in California. I'm not a Californian. I understand California. I loved it, but I was not born in California. I think I could take the best that California could give me, and I hope to be able to keep on practicing there. I have a couple of projects that I hope go ahead in Los Angeles, which will be very important to me. But I don't come to Yale as a Westerner.
In the several years that you have been at Yale now, have you seen any, in the students' work, any marked changes? And what you see, does that encourage you?
Students are wonderful. Students are absolutely wonderful. Right now, I think they are the best I have seen them in many, many years. It's not just Yale. I think this is a very, very good moment for architecture and for architectural education.
How does that manifest itself, and how do you explain it?
It manifests itself by the seriousness of their intentions, the intensity of their commitment, the quality of their work, the skills that they develop. They just draw beautifully, they design wonderful buildings, they are done very seriously, they are tremendously committed to architecture. And they work extremely hard. They work hard at their design, they work hard at their ideas, they work hard at their skills. Just wonderful. It's a marvelous experience. The changes have been also quite extraordinary. I have never been that close in education. I have always taught. I have always enjoyed teaching. I love it. I just love teaching. But I had never been that close, to any school. I had never taught full time. And the changes are extraordinary. Let's say 3 years ago, the students were just so interested in postmodernism. This was what everybody was concerned, talked about. About 2 years ago, postmodernism had passed, and the interest became the neo-rationalists. And we do this because we have these very long meetings with large groups of students to see who are they interested in having as lecturers or as guests. And this is how I get my primary feedback.
And what's this year's front edge?
This past year were only individuals who they thought were doing some working with ideas in an original way, their own ideas. And for this coming year, this was the most interesting thing. I had a group of students, and what they want to talk with is with architects that have built large buildings. And they really says, we really want to talk with people who have built.
Well, what does that really reflect? Is it a barometer of their work, a reflection of the attitudes of the architects, of the teachers who teach them, or the architects whose work they respond to?
They are, as they should be, extraordinarily good weather vanes. They perceive the slightest changes of winds in the intellectual and theoretical interest of the profession. And they can see at each moment where it points, as I say, as you can see in a rather exaggerated way. But the present interest is on buildings, which is quite extraordinary. And the courses that deal with putting buildings together and getting buildings built in their elective courses are highly subscribed. They all see that what is at issue now is knowing how to get buildings built and how to build them well.
Well, they are about to witness, I guess, their master take on one of the most, I guess, hazardous tasks that an architect can take on. And I'm referring to one of your current assignments, and that is the design of a residential tower and gallery expansion for the Museum of Modern Art, a project that is a response to, I guess, complex and often contradictory demands. Why don't we start by dealing with the realities, some of the problems that are familiar to some of us that you faced with a museum. You might start by talking about light and shadow and density and aesthetics and demolition and neighborhood structures and community boards and architectural historians and anything else you would like to add to that long litany.
Do we have 10 hours?
Look, why don't you give us the capsule version?
The most unusual or difficult thing in this project, of course, has been the fact that we have not only have to design this project in a glass bowl, but that there were hundreds of people with hooks and nets and harpoons all around the glass ball while we...
Drawing boards, too.
Well, while the project developed. This is, clearly what has made what is most unique about this project. It has many other unique characteristics, but that has been the most unique characteristic. We had, until we had our schematic design approved, by the time we took it for approval, I realized that I had made about 90 casual presentations, plus about 40 formal, highly elaborate presentations of the project. Normally, a project of that magnitude would require 2 presentations, and maybe the 2 would be casual ones.
Who was the master that you as the architect had to serve on this job? Was it the museum, the city, the Trust for Cultural Resources, the public, the developer, the co-architect who was hired by the developer? How did that all work?
Primarily, I would say the museum. Clearly, this is a very important building for a very important institution. In the way that I have served the public also has been because the public has been truly concerned with the fate of this institution. I must say, although the process has been difficult, and every time I came out of the community board rather, exhausted, I had to say to myself and to my associate, this is really a wonderful process.
That's why you were the ideal architect for the job, among other things, your resilience.
In our case, the process was maybe exaggerated because of the tremendous interest, but this was true public participation. These members of the community board would stay incredibly long hours, eating some stale sandwiches to stay discussing late at night. This was their dinner, and to stay discussing late at night this issue for which they were not paid a penny to do, which would not bring them any benefits. And this was really very impressed.
Well,
they may not have agreed, some of them may not have agreed with me, but this was done in true civic participation and a dedication of oneself to a civic cause. I think this is a very remarkable experience. Our open hearings were crowded with interested parties, people who were very concerned with the museum or with the street or with the quality of New York. This is, I cannot help but feel that this is just tremendously positive. It may have made it very difficult for us, but I think that's a very small price to pay for something so valuable.
I quite agree, but how responsive were you and the museum to some of the requests, suggestions by those outside forces?
Well, the level of our responsibility, of course, will be the judgment different depending from which point you look at it. But we took every request very seriously. Some we felt where possible, made sense, and we incorporated those requests. Great many, having to do with how much we encroach on the garden or the shadows, and we worked extremely hard as to make the absolute minimum possible intrusion on the garden and to keep the shadows to the barest of minimums. The qualities of the facade, how we should deal with the Edstone facade or the Philip Johnson buildings. We took all of those considerations very, very seriously. Some we could, of course, incorporate in our design, some we could not. You know, for example, the very basic request of some
the Richard Morris facade.
That we do not build the tower. You know, that one we took very seriously.
Well, why did you not incorporate the Richard Morris Hunt facade of the bookstore into the new?
Two reasons. The first and most important reason is that it was physically and economically, particularly economically, unfeasible. The Richard Morris facade was Richard Morris, not Richard Morris Hunt. It was not Richard Morris Hunt, and it was his nephew, which was not exactly Richard. No, I don't think it was Richard Morris Hunt. It was just Richard Morris. It was his, the facade of the bookshop annex was built 3 to 4 feet inside the property line, when the tower, in order to barely make sense in terms of the museum galleries and in terms of an economical apartment tower, had to be on the property line. Therefore, the new building would have had to cantilever around this facade or enclose it in some manner, which we checked structurally, and it was just incredibly expensive. It meant a few million dollars on this process. And this is one aspect of the problem. The secondary aspect of the problem was perhaps, for me, a more important one, a more basic one, which is aesthetical, and the attitude towards preserving buildings. When we made models about preserving the whole facade, parts of the facade, and it was always in my mind reducing a building that was quite noble and beautiful, with a mansard roof, that the mansard leaning back, and if we would have kept the mansard went back 15 feet from the property line, because the mansard, of course, leaned back. And the mansard was an architectural device, particularly to read against the sky. To suddenly put it inside a building, like if it was a brooch, it's a bit like, you know, shrinking a head and hanging it, you know, as inside your living room when you are trying to preserve the memory of somebody whom you love. It's not something that you do to buildings you love. It was really, for me, it was a travesty of the basic intention. It is not the proper way to preserve our buildings. I think it would have been a very misguided effort, but we took it very seriously. Although I had my apprehensions, as I said, we built careful models and we made a great number of drawings to try to preserve this facade. And the point was that we did take all of these requests very seriously. We ended up agreeing or not with the request, but we took them all seriously.
In the Museum of Modern Art project, you have yet another constituency to deal with. On the Board of Trustees, there are 3 very distinguished architects, each of whom have designed a number of museums themselves, one of whom is responsible for one of the facades that you are about to do away with. That you have done away with, Philip Johnson. Edward Larrabee Barnes is on the board, as is Gordon Bunshaft. And then, of course,
so is Wally Harrison.
And Wally Harris at 4. And yet another is Ivan Shermayev, the graphics designer, who certainly thinks like an architect and knows a great deal about architecture.
And there is also Arthur Drexler.
And Arthur Drexler, who is as you know, the museum's knowledgeable curator of architecture and design. How does that all work out? How do you wend your way through this complex cast of characters from within and without? And is it worth it?
Oh, yes, it is worth it. Clearly, it's worth it. They have been wonderful, really. Philip, particularly, and I say particularly because it has been, I do not know how I would have reacted in his position, where we were forced to have to tear down some of his structures. and to have to alter some others, has been extraordinarily supportive and patient and very, just taking all of this in extraordinarily good humor, just amazing. I am very, very impressed with how he was able to take all of this and to take a step back and be able to look at this objectively. And they have all been very supportive. We have had to make many presentations to them, and indeed I have listened to their suggestions with great care and taken their suggestions in very serious consideration.
Are there any notable ones that you incorporated?
No, we were, but we did.
You're just a very good listener.
No, maybe not. It's impossible to have any notable things incorporated into this project because it's a project that developed with very many small moves. Some of the more critical moves were more obvious that had to do with the relationship to the garden that we had to make by ourselves. But we were asked, for example, to study tearing down all of the facades and making a new facade. Some of the architects thought that an institution like this should have a single image and not a multiple image.
Why did you conclude that a multiple image was a more successful solution?
I felt because this is the reality of this museum, that it grew by stages. I think also...
But it's only a partial reality if you have done away with the Johnson extension.
That was never museum as such. Those were offices, so I felt that it was less critical. That was built as a temporary building. Philip himself had plans for an earlier extension west to tear the building down, and it was inevitable. But for the buildings that we kept, particularly the facade of the 1938 Philip Goodwin and Edward Durrell Stone facade, it has become, for many of us, the symbol of the Museum of Modern Art. To me, when I thought of the Museum of Modern Art, this is living in Argentina, I always thought of that facade in one of the famous photographs of 1938. I can still see it in my mind's eyes, that old photograph. And I think this is very important and very real. And that facade in our design remains as the main symbol and the main entrance of the museum. That facade is being kept as the only discordant element in color in the whole street. It's the only white element in a very dark street, which is, of course, what was done in 1938, because in 1938, you built a modern museum, you built a building that was new and clean and white and sharply machined, and also one that stood in contrast of the older masonry buildings of the street. Now, that contrast is something that, it reflects on the attitude of a time. See, remember that it's a museum about modern art.
Well, you raise a very important and interesting question, particularly at this point in time when the ideological fervor that the museum had in the days when it was first opened or its original building was erected has been lost. In fact, there is much talk of the purpose of a modern museum. Is it modern or is it contemporary in what some people call a postmodern period? There is even question if it is justifiable to do a modern building there now. How do you feel that you have solved that problem, if it has been a problem at all?
Well, as you know, I don't quite agree with the feeling that the modern movement or the modern ideology is over. It isn't. Otherwise there would be no terms like postmodernism. Postmodernism implies, as in terminology, that the modernism is alive and well. When you talk of post-industrialism, it doesn't mean that we go back to a pre-industrial society. When you talk of post-revolutionary, it doesn't mean that the revolution has been lost. It means that the revolution has been won. You can only have a post-revolutionary period if you won the revolution. You can only have a post-industrial period if industry has become universal. In the same way, you cannot have postmodernism if modernism is not alive and well and universal. Now, postmodernism as a small sect or school is another story. At that time, it's just a label for a small group of people working in a particular way. But in the larger meaning, the meaning is very simple. It reinforces the validity of the main movement of which they are an offshoot.
In this postmodern debate, some of which goes on with the great animation on your campus, where is your voice on that spectrum?
Well, in school, we have a very strongly a pluralist school. We feel that we are living in a period of ideas are being exchanged, discussed, reformulated, and new ideas are also being proposed and formulated. And our students want to be right there where the ideas are being proposed and formulated. So therefore, we are very open to all of those who we feel have some new ideas to contribute, or old ideas to be re-expressed in coherent terms. The question is the validity, not the newness of the idea. So that in the campus, the school is pluralistic. I have no intention whatsoever of imposing on the students or in the school my particular vision or understanding of where architecture is at.
Let's come back to the Museum of Modern Art for a moment. You're faced with yet another complex decision there now, and that is soon after the extraordinary send-off that the museum is giving to its former incarnation, and that is the remarkable exhibition of Picasso's. The question that you are faced with, and I guess you try to balance the imperfect options, and that is, does the building close for 2 years, or does it remain open on a partial basis for a longer period? What is your plan for proceeding with the construction?
Fortunately, that is not my decision nor my plan. That is a very difficult decision that the museum will have to make, and that is in the process of analyzing all of the pros and cons and costs, and both subjective and economical costs of these alternatives. If to close, for how long, and what aggravations, and no decision has been made yet.
Well, neither of them are obviously satisfactory solutions for the museum, the architect, or the public.
Well,
but of the two, which would you prefer?
It's not clear, because there are no architectural solutions. Architecturally, of course, from a construction point of view, if you forget about the other issues that may be more important, the simplest thing is to close it all, you build it once, in 2 years you open again. But that is clearly unacceptable for the museum, and for the people who love the museum, and for the sense of the museum is a part of New York. I don't think that museum can close for 2 years, and I don't think anybody imagines that the museum can.
How involved were the curators and heads of department in terms of interior design and space for their department?
Very involved in terms of determining their needs, the quality of their spaces, and their requirements.
And did the Department of Architecture and Design, in their singular role, have a special role in the design?
No, only because within the structure of our services to the museum, the galleries the galleries are being designed to suit the needs and understandings of what the gallery should be, of the curators and the museum as such. So in the case of the Department of Architecture and Design of Arthur Drexler, Arthur is designing his own spaces.
Well, it certainly has been, I guess, one of the most complicated projects that one could take on for all of the multi-reasons that we describe. I wondered if you've often wished that you could just go off somewhere and design a simple building free of some of these pressures and problems.
No, I do have some commissions where I design some buildings free of these pressures and problems, but I will not exchange them for anything. No, actually, see, in some ways, the Museum of Modern Art represents, in a very critical way, the characteristics of the buildings of our times, or the kinds of decisions we have to make. Our world is not perfect, and there are ideal solutions are not possible. Actually, I believe that the search for ideal solutions does great harm to good solutions because they divert the intentions from the possible to the impossible. And the Museum of Modern Art makes very clear, and it's a project that brings those conflicts very, very clearly into focus, that you have to make decisions between conflicting requirements. Actually, all of life, the most important decisions we make in life are about conflicting goals, conflicting ideas. And we have to make those decisions, and that's sometimes the difference between a good life and a bad life. And the same with buildings. Making the correct decisions when you have conflicting goals is what makes for good buildings and bad buildings. And I think actually that adds to this particular project a tremendous amount of vitality. The fact that there are apartments in the same site that there is a museum, that there is not a pure, ideal site that you just have a very wealthy donor or patron that will just give untold amounts of money so that the perfect museum can be built. But no, it's in a tight site in New York. It's very difficult to expand it. If you build a tower, it's cast shadow, and you have to build a building that will produce revenues on top of buildings that are for culture. I think it's really part and parcel of our lives in our cities. We do in our cities mix commerce with culture, with pleasure. This is what cities are all about, is that combination, that bringing into close proximity. It's all life. You know, a person living in an apartment is not any lesser than a person looking at a painting. These are all manifestations of lives of people. And I think each manifestation has its own dignity. An apartment is not less worthy than a museum.
You described the project earlier as designing something in a glass bowl, and that is certainly something consonant with one of your recurring interests, and that is the use of glass. Transparency is a phenomenon whose aesthetic qualities have concerned you for some time. Some people call it literal transparency, and I believe you prefer perceptual transparency. Can you tell us what some of the characteristics and some of the aesthetic implications are of that reference of yours?
Well, my interest was because, Colin Rowe wrote a wonderful article.
Together with Mr. Slutsky?
Together with Bob Slutsky, Transparency, Phenomenal, and Literal and Phenomenal. And I thought their article was a wonderful article. It was one very important article. And I think Phenomenal Transparency, they made it part of our vocabulary, and their descriptions of this phenomenon have become, we have all learned a lot from it. I only took an aside because they took some swipes at what they call literal transparency, and I felt they did not understand it. So that's why I wrote my article on perceptual transparency. My interest is manifold. One is because this is one of the materials we really have to learn how to use, clearly. Architecture has been shaped, clearly given shape, given form, given a theoretical background by stone construction for some 5,000 years. All of the theory of architecture is based, aesthetical theory is based on stone construction. Now, stone construction is all over. Unless our society goes through a violent upheaval, stone construction is all over. In order to have, because there have been social changes that will make it impossible to go back to the dominance of stone construction. In order to have stone construction, you need to have a class of people that is willing to work for almost no money, in large abundance, and be highly skilled. Today, you would have to pay those highly skilled people 25 cents an hour in order to be able to produce buildings that will be primarily stone construction.
So you're saying that arches and keystones and columns are really part of another era?
They are gone. So therefore, the primary meanings of all of these elements is gone. The secondary meanings remain, and they may have life for a while, but they cannot ever again serve as a basis or illuminate the transformations of architecture, the new movements of architecture. If an architecture is going to have life and survive, it has to deal with its own characteristics, with its own time. The emergence of stone construction created a tremendous revolution over previous forms of architecture, which were primarily architecture of sticks and grasses and skins, with totally different formal characteristics, the nomadic construction. And the emergence of stone construction changes radically the formal, the theoretical basis for formal decisions in architecture. And the disappearance of stone construction also will force us to change the basis for our development of a theory, of a formal theory in architecture. It's very new, therefore we are still a bit lost, but we have to deal with these new materials and the new qualities, and there are some wonderful things if you look at the positive side. And I have to look at the positive side. See, I'm an architect that builds, therefore I'm an optimist. Being an optimist is a required quality for anybody who wants to build, because construction is an act of optimism, it's an act of faith in the future. I guess it's like having a good voice if you want to be a singer, or or a good coordination if you want to be a good athlete or sportsman. And so optimism is a required quality. And looking at the good side, there are glass, for example, is a material that is fragile. Now, fragility, it's a quality that Western architecture has never dealt with. Western architecture has based its has put its formal heart primarily in permanence, durability. It comes from the desire that we have to build monuments to try to cheat death, to live beyond our own lives. And in order to do so, the only way to do it is with materials that are also dead, stone, so that they will remain. They will survive for some centuries, the ravages of time. Now, in the other hand, when we appreciate beauty that touches us most intimately, are usually the most ephemeral and fragile of things, those that touch us the deepest. Flower in springtime, sunset, the beauty of a person that we know is going to change and fade. Those are the things that they really touch us the deepest. So an architecture that depends for its expressive qualities in fragility has all of the potentials of being a richer architecture, more like our lives, than an architecture that depends on permanence and the qualities of death. There are examples of how, now, fragility doesn't mean that it has to last for a very short time. All it means is that it requires a commitment of the living to make it remain. The Temple of Ise in Japan is my best example. The Temple of Ise in Japan is built of wood and grass, and it has a very short life. It's a fragile architecture. So therefore, every 20 years is torn down, and the new one is built next to it. And so it has remained for close to 2,000 years, practically unchanged formally, but always new and always fragile. Now, it remains in better shape than any of our 2,000-year-old monuments in Western architecture built of stone, because it requires that continuous recommitment. In the moment the Japanese do not want to maintain the temple is going to decay, rot away, and disappear. But while the commitment remains, that temple is new and fresh and alive. The same with a building that is made out of a lightweight steel structure and glass. If it ceases to be maintained, the glass will break away, the steel will rust, and the building will disappear. But while the commitment remains, and the steel structure is repainted and maintained, and the glass is replaced if it breaks, it will be also new and fresh. So there are some precedents, not direct precedents, because we are dealing with a new technological condition. Actually, our systems of production have changed radically. And if we want an architecture, not my own architecture, not my own personal architecture to please me, but if I feel, as I do, that I work within the context of a very large architecture that has centuries behind me and centuries ahead of me, then I have to be dealing with the reality of my own time. I have to make architecture, I have to make art with the materials I have, not with the materials I do not have anymore, that do not have life anymore. Stone construction is gone.
Well, you have spent considerable time exploring the aesthetic possibilities of smooth surfaces, and I think we should take your own best example, certainly the most critically acclaimed, and like all such buildings, the most damned. And I am thinking of what is often referred to as the huge blue whale, the Pacific Design Center in Los Angeles. It's much bigger than anything else around it, and I guess that's one of the reasons that kind of attention has been paid to it. Can you tell us something about this building and also about your ideas of context in general?
Well, it's very difficult to talk about ideas of context in New York. I'm using the Pacific Design Center as an example, because it is built in an area that has no context.
Well, perhaps we should describe the Pacific Design Center and the fact, why does one choose to build a glass building that obviously uses reflective qualities of its surroundings and its context in an open space, which you have done on more than one occasion? Perhaps you could tell us.
Why would one build a Pacific Design Center? Let me actually tell you why the Museum of Modern Art is glass, which is, I think, clearer and better, and we'll all understand it better. Pacific Design Center was really a very simple problem, a very simple solution, just very beautiful, that's all.
But just tell us about it for a moment. It's a building so widely known.
It's a very large building. It's really a warehouse, a showroom for design showrooms, open into interior corridors. So those buildings are built all over the country, are brick boxes. Typically, they are a brick box with no windows, because the back of the showrooms is the exterior of the building. So in California, it's a very bad idea to build brick buildings, because during earthquakes, they shake and fall down. Also, they impose a heavy load on your structure, that makes it very expensive. On the other hand, a building of glass, funnily enough, works very nicely, because the glass just hangs there and shakes within its neoprene gaskets, and it has no effect on the structure. So sheathing it in glass appeared to be just a very nice and simple solution, and we could do it of a wonderful color like this deep blue, and it's really
Pacific Ocean.
No, just nice color. So it was really a very simple solution.
But actually, you like glass in many tints.
I have used glass. I like the qualities of glass. For one, is because, see, during my practice with DMGM and with Groen, we had many clients who came to us not seeking architecture, but just seeking a building. Therefore, they were only interested in spending the minimum possible amount of money. And I really learned to do architecture with no extra money for architecture as such. Therefore, which is the absolute minimum available to build the building. Just to give you an idea of the cost of Pacific Design Center. It is the same length as Place Beaubourg, the same width, the same height, same number of floors, same square footage, and it was built at about the same time.
And the cost?
And the Place Beaubourg cost somewhere between $90 to $150 million. Ours cost 18.
But that includes interior costs for Beaubourg as well, doesn't it?
No, the 150 includes interiors. I believe the 90 does not. So, which the 90 million should be comparable, I think, to our 18. I'm not quite sure of the figures because they have never been.
Well, it's still a very dramatic comparison.
You know, it's the kinds of numbers we were working with. This is very, very minimum cost. So therefore, glass is one of those materials that I discovered you can do wonderful things with for very little money. And that's how I learned to love glass. But there is no particular, and I like also glass because it has some qualities that I find quite extraordinary. It is reflective. It not only is fragile and impermanent, but the qualities of fragility and impermanence are clear in the quality of the glass itself. It's like the wings of a butterfly. They are not only fragile, but they look fragile, and its aesthetic qualities are part and parcel of that fragility. The same with glass. The aesthetic qualities of glass are part and parcel of its fragility and its ephemeral quality, that the images change, the reflections change, the color of the building changes with the color of the day. You know, the Pacific Design Center is bright blue, and, but towards dusk, it becomes flaming red with the sunset. And you know, actually, you will see the building that will go from blue to red to black in the same facade, you know, and it's just very beautiful. I find that extraordinary. So that the building, what is also very important, see, for me, and this is, if you wish, my existential position vis-a-vis my buildings, is that therefore, I am not in complete control of the building, which I believe I should not be. I do not control the final aesthetical qualities of my buildings. The aesthetical qualities of the building only become what they are after the building is built. A model is a very vague approximation, and a drawing is almost no approximation at all. The building only becomes what it is after built. Actually, the things that we love the most are like that, like our children, or, that they, if you really love them, they will be what they are themselves. You may affect their development, but they are, or, if you like gardening, a plant that you really love will be what it wants to be. You can help it, but you cannot change it. And so this quality of not being able to control completely the final quality of the building is very important to me. And the changeability of the glass, the fact that I cannot reproduce it, there's no way I can reproduce it in model form. Models are useless because the qualities depend on its size. Unless I build this 500-foot long wall, 120 foot high, I don't know what it's going to look like unless I put it in the right place. If I build a
So you never have a model for a building?
We build models. We build models so we can study other issues. We can study
But it's really drawings that you work
But
on.
no, the drawings are very secondary. Because I cannot make drawings that will reproduce those qualities. What I depend is on my experience, primarily. So the qualities are in my mind. I am guessing at what it will do. I never know what it will exactly do. And as I do not know how the Museum of Modern Art will look exactly, I really don't know. Our models are very vague approximations. And the drawings, as I said, are useless. The drawings are used to study other issues, not the final perceptual qualities of the building. In the drawings, we'll study proportions, entrances, relationship of parts, form, the same with the models. But the actual qualities of how the building will look, that building there will reflect, if you look, if from Fifth Avenue, it will be reflecting CBS in the one side, and the other side it will reflect the Canada House. And if you come from 6th Avenue, it will have a totally different quality because it will be reflecting the 666 building, which is the aluminum building with the little bumps. And on the other side, it will be reflecting ABC. And if you turn a little, it will reflect the Dorset Hotel or the Warwick Hotel. So it will be reflecting either dark gray or rich dark brown of the brick, or it will reflect in the white aluminum. And those conditions are going to change the colors that we have placed in the building. And they will intermix with those colors, and there will be a new reality that I can only guess at. Now, I'm very good at guessing those things because I have done enough of these buildings, and I spend endless number of hours thinking about these issues. But I can guess very well. I can only guess. I cannot predict exactly what it will happen.
Well, that guess is a very tutored one, and one that obviously reflects your view that architecture should represent today.
It's all we can do, anybody.
It also reflects this ongoing philosophy of yours. One of the things that you said it in another context, but it seems particularly relevant to me. You said it when you were talking about high technology, that there was no high technology in architecture. There is nothing but an expression of high technology. And you would say that the technology of today is industrial, but not all that industrialized. And then the phrase that you used to sum up that particular view was, and I'm going to quote you, and it is, quote, "I personally feel that the only safe ground is the middle ground." Is that a statement that you think has wider implications?
No, that statement was given, of course, within a, I would hate to say it has wider implications. I do not know what it will lead. No, I meant it in specific today. It depends if you want to be in a safe ground. I'm not advocating safety either. I like to take my chances too. But clearly, we are in a moment into which exploration is taking place. Now, there are two things that are happening. One is exploration, and the other one is the building of actual buildings, where we assume very specific responsibilities. I'm always very concerned with the issue of responsibility.
What is the underlying question of the architect's role and responsibility?
Well, see, the architect assumes, when a contract is signed, substantial responsibility towards the society that engages him or her. The buildings are imply the architect assumes the responsibility for handling very large resources. These are the savings of our social bodies. You know, a building, seems to be that the average cost of a building today, according to my commissions, is about $30 million.
30.
That's a lot of money. 30 million for any social group. 30 million now. The architect is entrusted with a judicious expenditure of those $30 million to provide a social good. Somebody is being entrusted with the handling of that money. Somebody may be the head of a commission or of somebody who has earned the money, but somehow society has entrusted somebody with that money who is takes the role, therefore, of the client. And the architect has to, in an intelligent way, use those resources. And not only you are using resources to provide a social good, that's why buildings are built. When you build a speculative office building, although the motivation may be the motivation of a developer to invest money, the purpose is to provide working space for a number of individuals, for a number of members of our own society. That's the real intention, that's the real purpose. So even when you do a speculative office building, you have a social responsibility to discharge. That's a basic. Architects have always done so. And at the same time, today particularly, you have the responsibility of using our resources intelligent, physical resources. The resources that are non-replenishable, the same as energy. This is a very critical responsibility that the architect shares. In a way, very rarely the architect assumes alone any of the responsibilities. Whenever a large building is built, what the architect does is to become a member of a team. One really enters into a collaboration where hopefully the responsibilities of the architects are well delineated, but there are overlaps all around the edges. One collaborates with the persons that put the money, one collaborates with the people that may lease the buildings or operate it or run it, one collaborates with the contractors, with the people that are going to build it, with the people that are with the janitorial services that are going to clean it, run it, use it. One enters into a rather complex collaboration, not to speak of all of the public bodies that have to support that building and provide it with electricity, water, sewage, etc. So that one enters into a very complex collaboration into which one really has to discharge one's part of that collaboration. And that's very, very important to me. I feel that one has indeed, and I have said this before, privileges as an artist. But I think those privileges as an artist only I can only exercise them after I have discharged my responsibilities as an architect. The responsibility, the discharge of my responsibilities have to come first. Only after I discharge the responsibility, I have earned the right to do art.
One of the collaborations that we've been talking about for these several months now is that collaboration and that potential collaboration between architects and artists, a question certainly of increasing concern to many of us. Is that something that you have ever done?
Yes, a few times. The most successful one is in the Commons of Columbus again.
The sculpture?
When we work with Jean Tinguely, where the sculpture was designed for the space. I first met Jean Tinguely. He had come from France, and we met at the Indianapolis 500. Which was a wonderful place. I did not know, but he's a racing car nut, totally.
What were you doing there?
Well, see, the Indianapolis 500 we happened to meet in Memorial Day, and it's very close to Columbus, so he suggested this, and we said, sure, why not? It's the first time, only time I have seen it. But for him, this was fantastic and became an annual ritual. So we met with Jean Tinguely, and after that, I gave him a program for the sculpture. I told him the sculpture should be about this size and about this color range, and it should move slowly, and it should have this quality. And he first reacted very badly. I thought he was just going to walk away, because of course sculptors never get a program. But after a while, he realized that I was not going to be on his back. And again, I never told him anything else afterwards. He was totally free to interpret and to develop his sculptures. And it was, we had many discussions and meetings, and it was wonderful. The sculpture and the building have been designed for each other, and they go together. His sculpture, he calls Chaos Number 1, activates the building, gives it life, and the building shelters the sculpture and gives it form. This is a very old device, if you wish, that there is an element, a positive element, that has its own life inside a space, and this gives its soul and center to the space. The space comes alive, but the reality of that positive element. And this is what the sculpture does, both comes alive, not only in a spiritual, mythical sense, but it also comes alive in a physical sense, because his sculpture is really alive.
When do you think collaborations are most feasible or desirable?
I'm not sure I will know when. I guess it's when you have when the architects and the artists have respect for each other and for their work. I don't believe it's possible otherwise. Today, architects and artists have to come together as equals. In the Middle Ages, it was easy. You just hire the artist. Or if you were if you were Ictinos and Callicrates, you just hired the sculptors and pay them by the yard. But today, they have to come as equals.
What's the most important thing that we should know about your work?
Oh, you have been asking good questions. That I love to build buildings.
And we loved listening to you. Cesar Pelli, American architect, philosopher, poet. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you all.